I never thought helping my neighbors dig out from a blizzard would lead to a full-blown war, but that's exactly what happened. It started, as these things often do, with a quiet sense of satisfaction. I was sitting in my warm kitchen, a mug of coffee steaming in my hands, looking out at the world buried under 2 feet of fresh, impossibly white snow. My company, a small landscaping and property maintenance business I'd built from the ground up, was technically shut down by the storm, but my instincts and my equipment were ready to go. I had a heavy-duty pickup with a commercial-grade plow, and I knew how to use it. Our neighborhood, Maple Creek Estates, had always been a peaceful place. For the 10 years I'd lived there, the Homeowners Association was more of a suggestion than an authority. It was run by a rotation of old-timers who mostly just made sure the grass in the little common park was mowed and the holiday decorations went up in December. Dues were low, rules were few, and neighbors helped neighbors. It was a good, quiet life. I liked it that way. I'm a simple man. I fix things, I build things, and I clear things. I prefer dealing with lawns and snowdrifts over dealing with people's drama. That all changed about a year before the blizzard, when Carol Peterson moved in. She was a woman in her late 50s who radiated an aura of perpetual dissatisfaction. She had a way of looking at your freshly edged lawn and seeing only the single dandelion brave enough to sprout near the curb. She saw problems where none existed and solutions that were always more complicated and expensive than necessary. Within 3 months, through a combination of relentless campaigning and the general apathy of everyone else, she had gotten herself elected to the HOA board. 6 months after that, she was the president. The changes started small. First came the mailbox mandate. All mailboxes had to be a specific model, black, with brass numbers of a particular font and size, purchased from a single approved vendor. Mine was a sturdy, perfectly functional box I'd set in concrete myself, but it wasn't the right model. A flurry of emails and passive-aggressive notices followed. Then came the rules about trash cans, which could no longer be visible from the street except for a 12-hour window on collection day. Then there were the approved paint color palettes for front doors and the regulations on seasonal decorations, complete with diagrams and date restrictions. The neighborhood grumbled, but mostly, people just complied. It was easier than fighting. The old, quiet cooperation of Maple Creek was slowly being replaced by a quiet, resentful obedience. The blizzard, however, was something Carol's binder of rules couldn't manage. It was a historic storm, the kind they name and talk about for decades. It dropped 2 feet of snow in less than 24 hours, with wind that sculpted it into drifts 4 and 5 feet high. The entire state was paralyzed. Our neighborhood was completely snowed in. The plowing service the HOA had on contract, a company from 2 towns over that Carol had selected for its professionalism and detailed service agreement, was nowhere to be seen. After finishing my coffee, I pulled on my boots and heavy coat. My own driveway was first. The big diesel engine of my truck rumbled to life, a reassuring sound in the muffled silence of the snow-covered world. The plow blade made a satisfying scrape against the asphalt, rolling a huge wave of white off to the side. It took me less than 15 minutes to clear my own space. As I was finishing, I looked across the street at Eleanor Henderson's house. She was a widow in her 80s, a sweet woman who always had a wave and a smile. Her late husband, George, and I used to talk about cars. I knew for a fact she couldn't even open her front door, let alone shovel her walkway. Her car was just a lump under a massive drift. Without a second thought, I angled my truck and drove across the street. I cleared her driveway carefully, making sure not to push snow onto her delicate shrubs. Then I got out with a shovel and cleared a path to her door and her mailbox. She opened the door just as I was finishing, her face a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Oh, Jack, you're a lifesaver," she said, her voice trembling slightly from the cold. I didn't know what I was going to do. "My pharmacy is supposed to deliver my heart medication this afternoon. Don't you worry about a thing, Eleanor," I told her. "We'll get you sorted out." That's when I heard the voice. A voice that could curdle milk. "Just what do you think you're doing?" I turned. There she was, Carol Peterson, standing at the edge of her own pristine driveway, bundled in an expensive-looking ski jacket, her arms crossed tightly. Her own driveway, I noted with a bit of grim satisfaction, had been professionally cleared by a crew with a skid-steer loader that must have arrived before the roads became impassable. An island of privilege in a sea of snow. "I'm helping a neighbor, Carol," I said, keeping my voice even. "You are operating a commercial vehicle for snow removal purposes on a residential property that is not your own, without a commercial service permit from the HOA," she recited, as if reading from a script. "That is a direct violation of Bylaw 17, Section C, Paragraph 4. I blinked, leaning on my shovel. The sheer absurdity of it was stunning. "Are you serious? It's a blizzard. I'm helping an elderly woman get her medication. There is no HOA plow service in sight. The approved vendor has been delayed by the unprecedented weather conditions," she said, her tone sharp and condescending. "That does not give individual residents license to engage in unauthorized commercial activities. It undermines the association's authority and creates a liability risk." Eleanor, looking worried, stepped back a little. "He's just being kind, Carol." Carol ignored her, her eyes fixed on me. "This is your only warning, Jack. Cease all non-personal plowing activities immediately. If I see that plow moving anywhere but on your own property again, I will begin levying fines. $100 per day, per violation." I stared at her. The wind whipped a fine spray of snow past her face, but she didn't flinch. She was enjoying this. The power. The control. In that moment, I realized this wasn't about rules or liability. This was about her. My attempt at reason was pointless. "You want me to stop helping my neighbors in a state of emergency because of a line in your binder? The rules are the rules for a reason," she said, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "They maintain order and protect property values. They are not suspended for a little bit of snow for a little bit of snow." I looked around at the buried landscape, at the houses sealed shut, at the silent, impassable street. It was a state of emergency, plain and simple. And this woman was standing here quoting bylaws at me. My jaw tightened. I gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're unbelievable. Consider yourself officially warned," she snapped, then turned and marched back toward her house, her boots crunching decisively in the snow. I stood there for a long moment, the cold seeping into my bones, but it was nothing compared to the chill of that encounter. I looked at Eleanor's worried face, then down the street at the other houses, still trapped. My anger began to cool, replaced by a slow-burning resolve. This wasn't just about snow anymore. This was about decency. I picked up my shovel. I had a walkway to finish. The rest of that day, I wrestled with my decision. Part of me, the part that just wanted a quiet life, told me to park the truck and let Carol have her petty victory. Let the neighborhood wait for the official, incompetent plow service. It wasn't my problem. But another part, the part that had seen the genuine fear in Eleanor's eyes, wouldn't let it go. What about the Miller family down the street with a new baby? What about Arthur, the retired gentleman who lived alone and had a history of falls? By late afternoon, my phone started ringing. It was Mark from 3 doors down. "Hey Jack, I know it's a huge ask, but my wife is a nurse. She's supposed to be at the hospital for the night shift, and there's no way she can get her car out. Any chance you could clear us a path?" I looked out the window. Carol's house was visible from my kitchen. I could almost feel her eyes on me. I thought about the $100 fine. Then I thought about Mark's wife, a nurse, trying to get to a hospital full of people who needed her. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, I said. I plowed Mark's driveway. Then another neighbor called, then another. I didn't ask for a dime. Some tried to press cash into my hand, but I refused. "Just pay it forward," I told them. By nightfall, I had cleared more than a dozen driveways, creating a passable lane down our entire street. People were able to get out, to check on each other, to feel a sense of normalcy returning. It felt good. It felt right. The next morning, tucked under my windshield wiper, was an official-looking envelope from the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Inside was a crisp, computer-printed letter. It detailed my violation of Bylaw 17C4 and formally assessed a fine of $100. At the bottom, in sharp, angry handwriting, was a note, second warning. The fines will continue to accrue. It was signed by Carol Peterson, President. I crumpled the letter in my fist. The war had begun. For the next 2 days, the snow continued to be a problem. The official plow service finally showed up, a single, undersized truck that scraped a narrow path down the center of the road and built a massive, icy wall at the end of every driveway I had so carefully cleared. So, I went back out, clearing the blockades for my neighbors. And like clockwork, another envelope would appear. $100. Then another. The fines were piling up. The community, however, was waking up. People who had quietly resented Carol's mailbox and trash can rules were now openly angry. Her obsession with control was no longer a minor annoyance, it was actively harming the neighborhood. The disruption was tangible. The mail carrier couldn't reach half the boxes on the street for 2 days. A school bus had to skip our stop because the turning circle was still blocked. Eleanor's medication delivery was only possible because I had cleared her path. The contrast between Carol's dictatorial enforcement and my practical, neighborly help was stark. I started getting quiet words of support. A plate of cookies left on my doorstep. A 6-pack of beer tucked behind my tire. People would catch my eye and give me a thumbs up. But nobody was willing to confront Carol directly. She had intimidated the board into submission and the residents into silence. They were afraid of being fined themselves, of being the next target of her petty tyranny. The 4th envelope was different. It contained the fines for days 3 and 4, but it also included a much more sinister document, a notice of intent to file a lien. It stated that if my outstanding balance of $400 was not paid within 30 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property. That was the moment the ground shifted. This wasn't just about annoying fines anymore. This was a direct threat to my home, to my livelihood. This was an attack I couldn't ignore. My anger gave way to a cold, clear-headed pragmatism. I was a man who solved problems for a living. This was just another problem, albeit one with a terrible attitude and a binder full of bylaws. I smoothed out the crumpled fine notices and the lien threat on my kitchen table. It was time to stop reacting and start planning. It was time to fight back, not with a plow, but with a strategy. My first call was to a lawyer. Mr. Davies was a calm, methodical man who specialized in real estate and contract law. I laid out the whole story, spreading the notices and the lien threat on his polished mahogany desk. He listened patiently, his fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "Well, Jack," he began, his voice dry, "you've run afoul of one of the most powerful and least understood forms of government in the country, the Homeowners Association." He explained that, legally, when I bought my house, I entered into a contract with the HOA. Their bylaws, no matter how petty or absurd, had the force of that contract behind them. She's technically within her rights to levy fines, and yes, to place a lien on your property if you don't pay them. Fighting this on the grounds of it's the right thing to do will be a long, expensive, and likely losing battle in court. My heart sank. So that's it? I just have to pay her and let her run roughshod over the whole neighborhood? Not necessarily, Mr. Davies said, a faint smile touching his lips. An HOA's power is immense, but it is not absolute. It is bound by its own governing documents and by state law. Her authority rests on a very specific set of rules, and she must follow them to the letter. So must the rest of the board. Tyrants like this, in my experience, often get so focused on enforcing the rules on others that they become quite sloppy about following them themselves. He leaned forward. This is what you're going to do. As a homeowner in good standing, which you are, until that lien is filed, you have the right to inspect the association's records. I want you to formally request, in writing, copies of the last 3 years of meeting minutes, the complete and current bylaws, and, most importantly, the detailed financial statements. All of them. Bank statements, budgets, expenditures, everything. What are we looking for? I asked. An irregularity, he said. Mismanagement. A failure to follow procedure. A financial discrepancy. Anything that shows she is not fit to wield the power she so clearly enjoys. Bullies and petty dictators are often sloppy with the books. They think no one is watching. I left his office with a clear plan. That afternoon, I drafted a formal, polite, but firm letter to the HOA board, citing the specific state statutes that gave me the right to the documents, and I sent it via certified mail. The first step in my investigation had been taken. While I waited for the response, I started talking to my neighbors more directly. My most important conversation was with Arthur Jacobson. Arthur was a retired forensic accountant in his late 70s who had lived in Maple Creek since the houses were first built. He was quiet, sharp as a tack, and had served as the HOA treasurer for years before the new regime took over. He'd stepped down in protest when Carol started ramming through her agenda. I found him tending to his bird feeders. I laid out the whole situation, including the threatened lien and my lawyer's advice. He listened, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm not surprised," he said when I was done. "Carol runs that board like her own personal kingdom. The last treasurer, a young fellow she pushed into the role, is completely overwhelmed. I doubt he even knows what he's looking at." He invited me inside, and over cups of hot tea, he told me about the HOA's finances as he remembered them. "We always kept a healthy emergency contingency fund," he explained. "It was for exactly this kind of thing, a major weather event, a failed sewer line, a big tree falling in the common area. There should be at least $40,000 in that account." A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived from the HOA. It contained a copy of the bylaws and the meeting minutes, but the financial documents were incomplete. There were budget summaries and high-level expense reports, but no detailed invoices, no bank statements. It was a classic stonewalling tactic. They were complying with the letter of my request, but not the spirit. I called Mr. Davies. "This is good," he said, much to my surprise. "It means they're hiding something. Send another letter. Demand the specific documents they omitted. Be polite, be persistent. Reference the previous letter and the date it was received. We're building a paper trail of non-compliance, so that's what I did." Another certified letter went out. In the meantime, Arthur and I went to work on what we did have. The meeting minutes were illuminating. We saw how Carol had systematically consolidated power, how she had proposed and passed dozens of new rules, often in poorly attended meetings. We saw how she had terminated the contract with the local, reliable landscaping company we'd used for years and signed a new, more expensive one with the firm from out of town that had failed so spectacularly during the blizzard. The expense reports were even more interesting. There were vague line items for community enhancement projects and professional consulting fees that had never existed before. The landscaping contract was nearly double the old one. The legal fees had tripled. It all smelled wrong, but without the detailed records, we couldn't prove anything. The second response from the HOA was another package, this one with a curt note from Carol stating that these were all the documents required by law. It contained more of the same, summaries, not details. But this time, they made a mistake. Tucked in with the budget reports was a single, solitary bank statement for the main operating account. It must have been included by accident. Arthur and I spread it out on my kitchen table like it was a treasure map. We saw the monthly dues coming in, the regular payments going out. And then we saw something odd, a recurring monthly payment of $2,500 to a company we'd never heard of, Summit View Property Management. Summit View, Arthur mused, tapping the paper. That doesn't sound like a local company. Why would we be paying a property management firm? The HOA is self-managed. This was the thread. I could feel it. I spent the next several hours online, digging into this mysterious company. At first, I found nothing. But then, I ran a search on the state's corporate commission database. And there it was. Summit View Property Management LLC. It was a registered business, all right. And the registration address wasn't a commercial building. It was a residential address in a small, affluent resort town in the mountains of a neighboring state, a place known for its ski slopes and vacation cabins. My heart started to beat a little faster. On a hunch, I went to that county's property tax records website. I typed in the address listed on the corporate registration. The search results popped up, and I felt a jolt, a sudden, electric shock of discovery. The owner of the property at that address, the address of Summit View Property Management, was listed as Carol Peterson. Arthur and I stared at the screen in stunned silence. "My God," he whispered. "She's paying herself. She set up a shell company and is billing the HOA for services never rendered." We kept digging. We looked at the date the company was formed. It was just 2 months after she became HOA president. We cross-referenced the payments on the bank statement. They started the very next month. $2,500 a month for almost a year. That was $30,000. Then we looked at the expense reports again, searching for those payments. They weren't there. Not under that name. But then Arthur pointed to a line item under Common Area Maintenance. It was a vague entry, simply labeled Contracted Services, for exactly $2,500 a month. She had been burying the payments under a deceptive category. But the final piece of the puzzle, the one that made it all so much worse, came when we looked at the HOA's budget summary. We saw the line for the Emergency Contingency Fund, the fund Arthur had told me about. A year ago, its balance was just over $42,000. Its current balance was $2,000. The blood drained from my face. "Arthur," I said, my voice low. "The money going to her shell company. It's not from the operating budget. She's been draining the emergency fund. It was all there. The reason the HOA's contracted plow service was the cheapest, most incompetent firm she could find. The reason there was no backup plan. The reason she was so fanatical about levying fines for a few $100s. She had embezzled the community's entire safety net to pay for her vacation home. The blizzard hadn't just exposed her incompetence, it had exposed her crime. The fines against me weren't just about power, they were a desperate attempt to refill the coffers she had personally emptied. We finally had it. This was the irregularity Mr. Davies had talked about. This was the leverage. The game had changed completely. We were no longer on the defensive, trying to fight a $400 fine. We were on the offensive, holding proof of a $30,000 theft. Our strategy shifted immediately. We were no longer fighting Carol, we were preparing to expose her. Mr. Davies was ecstatic when I called him. "This is better than I could have hoped for," he said, his voice buzzing with energy. "It's clean. It's documented. It's irrefutable." He gave us precise instructions. We made copies of everything, the bank statement, the corporate registration for Summit View, the property tax record with Carol's name on it, the HOA financial summaries showing the depleted emergency fund. We created a clear, simple timeline of events. We were building a case, not just for the HOA board, but for the district attorney. The next step was to bring the community into the fold. A special HOA meeting had been called by Carol, ironically, to discuss new proposals for enforcement of community standards and collection of delinquent accounts. It was the perfect venue. We spent the next week quietly going door to door, talking to our neighbors. We didn't show them all the evidence at first. We just asked them to come to the meeting. We spoke of the failed snow removal, the ridiculous fines, the lack of transparency. We told them that if they wanted things to change, they needed to be there. The frustration that had been simmering in the neighborhood was ready to boil over. People were tired of being intimidated. Our quiet campaign worked. On the night of the meeting, the community center meeting room, which usually held a half-dozen board residents, was packed. More than 50 homeowners were there, standing along the walls, their faces grim and expectant. Carol was sitting at the head table with her 2 loyal, but clearly nervous, board members. She looked surprised and a little annoyed by the large turnout, but she pressed on, a smug smile on her face. She opened the meeting by announcing the success of her beautification initiatives and then launched into a lecture about the importance of following the rules. Finally, she came to the heart of her agenda. As many of you know, she began, her eye scanning the room, we have had some recent challenges with residents who believe the rules do not apply to them. This has resulted in the levying of fines, which are essential for the financial health of our association. She glanced in my direction. Therefore, the board is proposing a new, streamlined process for placing liens on the properties of delinquent homeowners to ensure prompt payment. A low murmur went through the crowd. This was our moment. Before she could continue, Arthur stood up. He was a respected figure, and the room fell silent. "Madam President," he said, his voice calm and steady, "before we discuss new ways to collect money, I believe the homeowners here deserve to know how our money is currently being spent. Specifically, I have a question about the Emergency Contingency Fund." Carol's smile tightened. "All financial documents are available for review upon request, as per the bylaws, Mr. Jacobson. This is not the proper forum for individual financial queries." "I believe it is," Arthur continued, undeterred. "Because that fund, which should contain over $40,000 for emergencies like the recent blizzard, is nearly empty. And I believe the residents of Maple Creek have a right to know where it went." The room was dead quiet. Carol's face paled. "That is a baseless and inflammatory accusation," she sputtered. That was my cue. I stood up, holding a remote for the projector I had set up at the back of the room. "It's not an accusation, Carol," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. "It's a fact. And we have the documents to prove it." I clicked the remote. The first image on the screen was a copy of the HOA's own budget summary, showing the emergency fund's balance plummeting over the past year. The second click brought up the bank statement, with the $2,500 monthly payments to Summit View Property Management highlighted in yellow. "We were all wondering why our snow removal was so inadequate during the storm," I said, addressing the crowd. "The reason is that the money meant to handle that emergency was being diverted. Month after month, it was sent to this company." Another click. The corporate registration for Summit View appeared on the screen, showing the address in the mountain resort town. A wave of confused muttering filled the room. "And who owns this mysterious property management company that our HOA has paid $30,000 to over the last year?" I paused for effect. "Let's look at the county property records." The final slide came up. It was the tax record. The owner's name was right there, in stark black and white, Carol Peterson. The room erupted. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated fury. People were shouting, pointing, demanding answers. Carol was frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. Her two board members looked at the screen, then at her, and physically pushed their chairs away from her, as if she were contagious. "It's a misunderstanding," she shrieked over the noise. "It was a consulting fee. It was all approved." "Was it approved in an open meeting, Carol?" Arthur called out. "Was it recorded in the minutes? Or did you bury it in the budget and drain our community's safety net to buy yourself a ski cabin?" Her authority, so absolute just minutes before, had completely vanished. It had been a hollow shell, and we had just kicked it to pieces. She looked around desperately for an ally, but found only the accusing eyes of the neighbors she had bullied and fined for months. At that moment, as if on cue, the doors at the back of the room opened. Two uniformed sheriff's deputies stepped inside. Mr. Davies, true to his word, had made a call to the district attorney's office that afternoon, providing them with a copy of our entire file. The arrival of law enforcement was not a coincidence. The deputies walked calmly to the front of the room. One of them spoke to Carol in a low voice. We couldn't hear what he said, but we saw the last bit of color drain from her face. We saw her shoulders slump in utter defeat. The fight was over. The shouting in the room died down, replaced by a stunned, watchful silence as the deputies escorted a now sobbing Carol Peterson out of the community center. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With Carol gone, the remaining two board members resigned on the spot. An emergency interim board was formed, with Arthur reluctantly but dutifully agreeing to serve as president. Their first official act was to unanimously vote to dismiss all outstanding fines against me and to issue a formal, public apology. The threatened lien was, of course, history. The legal consequences for Carol were severe. The district attorney filed charges of felony embezzlement and wire fraud. The case was airtight. With the mountain of evidence we had provided, her lawyer advised her to take a plea deal. She was convicted, sentenced to 2 years in state prison, and ordered to pay full restitution to the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Her house went up for sale a few months later to cover her legal fees and the restitution payments. We heard her vacation cabin was sold as well. With the stolen money returned and the tyrant gone, a sense of profound relief washed over the neighborhood. The interim board, led by Arthur, went to work dismantling Carol's oppressive regime. They held a series of open town halls, and together, we rewrote the bylaws. The absurd rules about mailboxes and paint colors were struck. The core principles became simple: be safe, be respectful, and maintain your property reasonably. The focus shifted from punitive enforcement to neighborly cooperation. We hired back the local, reliable landscaping company we had used for years. We signed a contract with a reputable local snow removal firm that had a fleet of trucks and a solid reputation, a friendly competitor of mine, in fact. I wanted to make it clear I hadn't done any of this for personal gain. My reputation in the neighborhood was restored tenfold. I was no longer just the guy with the plow, I was the guy who had stood up to the bully and won. People waved when I drove by, they stopped to chat, they treated me with a new level of respect and gratitude. A couple of years passed. The neighborhood healed and became even better than it was before. The oppressive quiet of Carol's reign was replaced by the lively sounds of a community that actually liked itself. Property values, which had stagnated under her micromanagement, began to climb. People were proud to live in Maple Creek again. The HOA, now run by a board of reasonable people, became what it was always meant to be: a quiet, background support system for the community, not its overlord. One afternoon, I was in a grocery store in the next town over, picking up some things for dinner. As I rounded the end of an aisle, I saw her. It was Carol. She looked smaller, diminished. The hard, self-righteous anger in her eyes was gone, replaced by a haunted, weary sadness. Her hair was gray, and she moved with the slow, uncertain shuffle of someone who had been broken. Our eyes met for just a second. I saw a flash of panic, then shame. She quickly looked away, turning her cart and hurrying down another aisle. I felt no triumph, no desire for revenge. I just felt a quiet sense of pity. Her obsession with control had cost her everything: her home, her freedom, her reputation. She had built her own prison long before the state had locked her in one. I finished my shopping and went home. Sometimes, when a big snowstorm is in the forecast, I think back on that whole ordeal. I learned that petty power, left unchecked, can grow into something truly monstrous. I learned that rules without reason are just a tool for oppression. But I also learned something more important. I learned that a community is not a set of bylaws or a collection of houses. It's a group of people who are willing to look out for one another. It's the willingness to plow your neighbor's driveway in a blizzard, not because a rule tells you to, but because it's the right thing to do. The other night, the snow started falling again. Big, fat flakes drifting down in the quiet dark. I woke up the next morning to a familiar white blanket covering everything. I sat in my kitchen, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, and watched the sunrise paint the snow pink and gold. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the new HOA president, a young mother who lived down the street. "Plows are on their way," it read. "Stay warm, everyone. Check on your neighbors." I smiled. The snow was just snow again. The neighborhood was at peace. And my plow was in the garage, ready if needed, but thankfully, no longer the instrument of a rebellion. I took a sip of my coffee. The silence was perfect.